What shook the NBA wasn't a missed shot. It was Jimmy Butler opening a folder on live TV. What happens when the league's most honest player exposes the league's biggest lie? Basketball fans, subscribe to the channel because we'll keep sharing the best, most meaningful stories. Normally, Jimmy Butler didn't really like appearing on live broadcasts, especially the roundtable discussions filled with the safe faces of the NBA media. But this time was different, because the file he was holding could destroy not just a career, but the entire system's so-called credibility. The name of the program, NBA Insider Live. The topic, performance, young players, and the new generation in the league. That was all there was to it. It was 22 minutes into the broadcast. Everyone was talking, of course, but essentially nothing was being said. A sports analyst was talking about how young players can't take care of their bodies, and a former coach was repeating that previous generations worked harder. Laughter, nodding, polite boredom. It was all pretty standard fare. That is, until one person came out and made a semi-serious joke about Stephen Curry. Maybe Curry still playing at MVP level at this age is some kind of genetic miracle. What do you think, Jimmy? The cameras turned to Jimmy in seconds. Until then, Jimmy had been listening carefully to the comments in silence. He hadn't joined in the chatter at all, but at that moment, he leaned forward slightly. However, his eyes showed that he was quite determined. Then he spoke. I guess you think these things are jokes, but if we're not going to talk about what someone is actually using and how they're hiding it, then what are we talking about here? There was silence in the hall. The host tried to recover. Jimmy, are you implying something here? Jimmy took a small envelope out of his pocket. It was a faded envelope. He opened it slowly and continued speaking. If these test results belonged to a rookie player, he wouldn't even be playing in the G League right now. He took several pages of documents out of the envelope. The camera continued to capture those moments live. Special laboratory reports, blood sample analyses, doping monitoring notes. The presenter whispered, "Do these belong to Stephen Curry?" Jimmy did not answer directly, but he said, "These documents have been regularly updated since 2021. Each one is linked to the same name. They all come from the same private medical team, and that team is currently working at Curry's private training camp." A cold breeze swept through the studio. A commentator interjected, "But that's a very serious accusation, Jimmy. Could it be Photoshop? You could be misleading people." Jimmy smiled, but there was a pained expression in his smile. "That's why I had 2 different independent testing centers analyze it. One of them was a team that had already worked on the NBA's 2022 season tests." The host wanted to go to a commercial break, but Jimmy's voice was heard once more. "I'm not accusing anyone here. I'm just asking, if his name wasn't Curry, where would these test results go?" That sentence hung in the air. Before the camera cut to the commercial, Jimmy's face was on the big screen. His eyes were looking directly at the audience. It wasn't what he said, but the courage to say it that resonated. Just 30 minutes after the broadcast, social media was ablaze. Headlines such as "Jimmy vs. Curry" were trending within minutes. Clips were prepared and edited, and analyses were made. But what spread the most was this: Jimmy's one sentence. If his name wasn't Curry, where would these test results go? The phones in the NBA office were ringing off the hook. PR teams were on call, and media relations directors were making urgent calls. But at that moment, in Los Angeles, preparations were underway for a private event organized by Curry's sponsors. That night, Curry was going to receive the Leading Player Investing in the Future award and give a short speech on stage. Everything had been planned. The speech was to last 3.5 minutes, accompanied by soft piano music in the background, followed by applause. But that speech never happened. At 9:48 p.m., as Curry was walking backstage to the waiting area, he glanced at his phone, which was buzzing with notifications. His assistant approached him and whispered, "Jimmy's broadcast is trending online right now." He showed the test documents. Curry's face turned as white as a sheet. His eyes were fixed on a single point. "He showed my documents? What documents?" he asked in a dazed manner. Everything became blurry after that. The staff behind the stage said that Curry suddenly collapsed to his knees. put his right hand on his heart, and had difficulty breathing. No one rushed over because they didn't even understand what was happening. But a cameraman, perhaps out of reflex or perhaps taking advantage of the opportunity, had already taken his phone out of his pocket and started recording. He managed to capture 7 seconds of footage. The footage shows Curry was sitting just behind the stage curtain. His hands were on his knees, and his head was bowed forward. He was breathing rapidly. There was no anger or defensiveness on his face. Only fear was evident. It was naked, unbridled, and familiar fear, the fear of a career slipping away when the truth came out. The video had already leaked within hours. Some called it a panic attack. Others said it was low blood sugar. But everyone could see that. This was the moment when a legend collapsed before taking the stage. The following morning, the NBA's official account posted the following statement. Stephen Curry was unfortunately unable to take the court due to a brief illness. He did not feel well due to the dry air in the venue. He is now doing well. But the event was held in the ballroom of a 5-star hotel. The air conditioning system was state-of-the-art, and the humidity was stable. Most importantly, Curry hadn't even picked up the microphone yet. At that moment, Jimmy was sitting alone in his home in Miami. He did not answer any of the phone calls he received after the broadcast. His manager, lawyer, and former teammates all called him, but Jimmy did not answer any of them, because it was not an easy decision to show those documents on live television. He hadn't told anyone. Even his teammates found out while watching the broadcast. The file was still on the coffee table in his home. There were even pages that hadn't been opened yet. That's because he had only shown part of the documents on the broadcast. But he knew for sure that the supplement protocol Curry was using wasn't just about him. The documents contained the names of other players. All of their health checks had been carried out at the same center. Some notes mentioned a stamina protocol version 3, and this protocol contained substances that normal doping tests could not detect. Jimmy thought to himself, this is definitely not just about Curry. This is about the rottenness of the entire system. There was a knock at the door. His assistant Curtis entered, holding an envelope. There was no name or address on it. Just one sentence. If you continue, someone will definitely stop you. Jimmy stared at the envelope for a long time. Then he quietly placed it on the desk. If they got scared so quickly, it means there are still things I don't know, he said. That night, Jimmy made a decision for the first time. His goal would no longer be just to tell the truth, but to shake up the system at the same time. And the system already felt the tremors. The next morning, Jimmy received an encrypted message on his phone. The sender seemed familiar, but the number was not saved. It simply said, "They can never speak, but I will." 7 p.m., the back entrance of the old gym in Brickell. Jimmy hesitated at first. Threats like this usually came at the end of meetings like this, and were generally not taken seriously. If they were taken seriously, they would either be silenced or discredited. But the voice inside him would not be silenced. Fear should not be a reason to retreat, but to walk more carefully toward the truth. At 6:58 p.m., Jimmy arrived at the designated spot wearing a black hoodie. The gym was closed, and the windows were dark. Someone came out through the door and motioned to him with his head. When he entered, there was only a table and 2 chairs in the dimly lit room. The person sitting across from him was a familiar face. It was Marcus Hill. He was a former fitness trainer. He had worked for the Golden State Warriors for a while, then just disappeared. Until today, he had never given a media interview or made any statement. "Why did you call me?" Jimmy asked. Marcus spoke without looking away. "Because I can confirm everything in that file. I can even confirm things you don't know." Jimmy leaned back in his chair. Before speaking, silence is sometimes more powerful than words. Marcus took a flash drive out of his pocket. This is a draft version of the protocol. It contains internal correspondence showing how the system actually works. And it's not just Curry. 4 other players were also in the program. The team doctors signed the documents giving their permission. But the most important thing is that he paused and took a deep breath. This program was quietly and secretly supported by the league, because it was a program designed with the idea that stars must always stay on their feet. Jimmy frowned at that moment. "Are you saying that the NBA supported it?" Marcus shook his head. Of course not openly, but under the guise of implicit permission. The top management of the teams opened the door to this because they knew that if performance declined, advertising deals would also decline. You showed Curry's medical records, but what you really need to know is this. These documents are only focused on results. The real danger is that this system is still being presented as sustainable. Jimmy took the memory stick from Marcus. Although he didn't know what was on it, he felt that what he was holding in his hand was no longer just a career, but also the conscience of an institution. When he got home that night, he didn't open the file. First, he called his team, his manager, his lawyer, and his media advisor. They all agreed and said the same thing. This is definitely a huge gamble. They'll sue you. They'll ruin your career. Jimmy was silent for a few seconds. Then he simply said, I didn't rise through the ranks by agreeing with this system. Now I can end it by fighting it. It's not a problem for me. 2 days later, Jimmy agreed to appear on a podcast. But it wasn't just any podcast. It was an independent sports channel called Basketball Unfiltered, which was extremely popular with young people. When the broadcast began, the host asked directly, Mr. Jimmy, did you ever think this would get this big? Jimmy was very clear, as always. Of course, I didn't want it to get this big, but if it has to get this big, then we have to look at it without fear, because this isn't just about Curry. It's about who else it ensures will be silenced. The host asked again, Do you have any other documents? Jimmy waited a moment, then he looked at the cameras. There was no sign of fatigue in his eyes. There was only a sharp determination. In the next broadcast, I won't just show the documents. I will also reveal who this system has worked with, who has silenced people, and even who has supported it. As expected, the podcast broke viewing records on the night it was broadcast. Young players wrote the following in the comments section. This is the first time an NBA star has spoken out for us. He's not just a player, he's a witness. Someone had to speak out before this system swallowed us whole. And what Jimmy did that night wasn't just speaking out. He had started something else at the same time, not just with documents, but with his presence there. The light of a star who refused to obey shone even brighter in the darkness of the system. And now that light was beginning to illuminate not just NBA arenas, but screens, headlines, and even club meeting rooms. Jimmy had spent several sleepless nights. Messages, threats, and support were now mixed together. Some of his former teammates chose to remain silent, while others called to say, We're behind you, buddy. But the real change was in the looks they gave each other face to face. Everyone knew that this man was no longer just an athlete. He was like a bomb waiting to go off. With minutes to go before going on air, his phone suddenly rang. It was a consultant from the NBA Board of Directors. Don't do it, Jimmy. If you do this, you'll burn not only yourself, but the entire league. Jimmy hung up without even answering, because he no longer cared about anything or anyone, and he had no intention of stopping. That evening, Jimmy Butler appeared as a guest on ESPN Prime Live. Before the program, he didn't want to show anyone any documents. Even the host had no idea what to expect. When the broadcast began, there was a strange silence in the studio. Everyone was waiting tensely. Even the host struggled to deliver the opening line. Tonight, we have Jimmy Butler with us. What he has to say is likely to be both surprising and controversial. Jimmy gave a brief greeting and then slowly placed his file in front of him. Look, I'm definitely not here to cause a sensation, he said. But there are some fairy tales that have been told to us for years. And because of these fairy tales, the truth has been kept in the dark. The time has long since come to bring them to light. He took the first document out of the envelope. It was a medical report. It was labeled Performance Enhancement Protocol. Next to it was a name, Stephen Curry. Date, November 2021. The host suddenly swallowed hard. How reliable can these documents be, Mr. Jimmy? Jimmy turned directly to the camera. These documents have been examined by 2 different independent sports medicine laboratories. And it's not just this document. I currently have protocol documents belonging to 4 star players, and they are all within the same system. The next document contained internal communications from a private training facility. It clearly stated, the D3 protocol for player X will continue. Monday is test day. The substance list has been updated to avoid triggering the NBA control protocol. Jimmy continued relentlessly. The person who wrote these emails is still working for an active team, and these emails don't just talk about fighting doping. On the contrary, they explain how doping should be managed. The presenter was stunned and didn't know what to say, so he just continued listening. But Jimmy didn't stop there, of course. I didn't obtain these documents secretly. They were sent to me, because there are people in this system who can no longer carry the burden of their conscience. Then he turned back to the camera. With your permission, I would like to address Stephen Curry. Curry, this is still a chance for you. Telling the truth is much more valuable than defending yourself, my friend. Because I'm not just exposing you, I'm exposing those who have protected you along the way. At that moment, it was as if time had stopped in the studio. Jimmy stood up and took a small USB flash drive out of his jacket pocket and placed it on the table in front of him. This flash drive contains images taken from private training facilities, video recordings, and conversations with medical teams. I will personally deliver all of this to the NBA Ethics Committee tomorrow morning. But this is definitely not a threat. This is a responsibility I have taken upon myself. The host could barely swallow. Jimmy delivered the final words of the broadcast. A league shouldn't be great just because its stars shine. The real question is how those stars earned their shine. When the broadcast finally ended, comments on Twitter and YouTube were, as expected, through the roof. Some declared Jimmy a hero. Some called it jealousy, but no one could ignore the truth in his words. The next morning, the NBA Ethics Committee was immediately called to an emergency meeting. While management remained silent, some sponsors issued statements of support for Jimmy. The press had already reached everywhere. Footage leaked from the studio, Jimmy's words, and of course the documents taken from the file spread within hours. But at that moment, Jimmy received another message. This time, it was from an unknown phone number. What you are doing right now is just scratching the surface. The real story is who created this system. If you want to find out and discuss it, go to tomorrow night, Sunset Drive, rear entrance of the closed sports hall. Jimmy stared at the initials for a long time and muttered to himself, finally, here we go. Sunset Drive, rear entrance of a closed sports hall. It was a dilapidated, abandoned sports facility with a collapsed roof. But for some reason, the person who sent the message had chosen this place. The reason was obvious: to stay in the shadows and leave no trace. Jimmy arrived 10 minutes before the appointed time. He was wearing a plain gray sweatshirt with the hood up. There was only one other person with him, Curtis, the only person he trusted. Before entering, Jimmy took a small recording device out of his pocket. He didn't hide it. He kept it out in the open, because he no longer had any room for fear. Trust was something that had to be earned through transparency, not documents. A figure appeared in the doorway. He approached them slowly. When he took off his hat, Jimmy recognized him, Logan Myers. He had been Stephen Curry's digital infrastructure consultant for a while, but then he left for some reason. No media outlet had ever chosen to talk to him. His name only appeared in documents. Jimmy bowed his head. Is that you, LM? Logan nodded slightly. It's me, my friend, he said. And I worked and lived in the backbone of this system for a very long time. They sat on a metal bench. The surroundings were quiet, dark, and cold. Logan took an old external hard drive out of his pocket. I was just a technical consultant, but I know how the system was set up, how it works, and who turned a blind eye to what, like the back of my hand, he said. At first it seemed innocent. It was a system that would protect data and provide performance analysis to young players. But then, he paused. His eyes drifted into the distance. Then Curry gained access to the system. He looked at some confidential analyses to improve himself, but these analyses were only accessible to top NBA executives. Then, after a while, that information leaked out, and the systems known as performance protocols emerged and began. Jimmy listened intently. He hadn't interrupted once. So that's where the doping program started? He asked. Logan nodded in agreement. Yes, Jimmy. The substances used were first tested. Then the team doctors were integrated into the system. And worst of all, another name was added to the system, Perry Selena. Jimmy's eyes narrowed. He had seen that name somewhere before, in protocol documents, in approval emails, but he never knew who it was. "Who is he asked. Logan replied, "Jared Kushner's former advisor. He currently heads a private health technology company. Of course, they have direct agreements with the NBA. He was in charge of the entire protocol." Jimmy was silent again for a moment. Then he slowly shook his head. That's why everyone had to keep quiet. And that's why they had to turn a blind eye. In short, this wasn't just about Curry. Logan continued. And it wasn't just about performance. Sponsorship deals, media investments, and the management of young players. It was all part of the system. And when you broke it, they had to silence you. Jimmy took a deep breath. "You're too late," he said. "I've already shown the documents. I'm not stopping now." Logan shook his head. "This disk contains all the correspondence, transfer history, and health management system of the protocol managed by Perry Salina. I'm sharing the data with you, but be careful. These people don't just play with reputation. They also threaten. They shut things down." Jimmy took the disk. "I'm already playing a risky game, but I'm certainly not going to play by their rules anymore." That night, Jimmy returned to his home in Miami. Roland and Curtis were waiting for him. They opened the external disk. The title of the first document appeared on the screen. Program description, Project Alpha, Star Protection Protocol. Below were 18 names. 7 of them were active NBA players. 3 were media consultants. 4 were health protocol officers. And 1 was Perry Salina. The next morning, Jimmy went live on his social media account early in the morning. He wasn't in a studio. There were no filtered backgrounds, just a plain wall, a desk, and his laptop. He began his speech as follows. "I am Jimmy Butler. I am recording this video not as a player, but as a citizen. The documents I have in my hands concern not just one name, but an entire system. As of this morning, I have personally delivered these documents to the NBA Ethics Committee, the Department of Justice, and the Court of Arbitration for Sport. At the end of this broadcast, I will of course make a summary of this information available to the public." He showed the documents one by one, mail chains, lists of items, protocol flows. Without making any comments, he just showed them. Then he continued his speech. "This can never be a matter of anger. In essence, this is a matter of justice. I did not grow up in this system. I fought my way into this system, and now it is my natural duty to expose its flaws." By the time the broadcast ended, it had reached 10 million views. Most of the comments echoed the same sentiment. "We will no longer remain silent." A week later, the NBA announced that it had launched a comprehensive internal investigation. Perry Salina was called in for questioning. Stephen Curry remained silent. His lawyers said they would not comment, but this time, no one could be silenced. Jimmy Butler, nearing the end of his career, had played perhaps the greatest final game of his life. But there were no points in this game. There were no rebounds. In this final game, there was only conscience. And that conscience touched the very core of the league. What about you? Would you remain silent when faced with the truth, or would you speak up like Jimmy? I'm curious to hear your thoughts. Write them in the comments and share this story with a basketball-loving friend. Let's discuss it together.